Phillips Horizontal Diagnost H is a safe, efficient X-ray imaging device designed for easy operation and maximum patient comfort. Combined with one of the Phillips family of CP generators, the Diagnost H provides a high-performance system for routine radiographic exams and tomographic studies. This videotape is designed to help familiarize you with important features and functions of the Horizontal Diagnost H system. It should be used as a supplement to your printed operator's manual. The video will cover system components, the basic controls of the Horizontal Diagnost H and the generator, as well as use of the system for standard diagnostic studies. The system is composed of an adjustable patient table, a high-performance Bucky unit, an X-ray tube collimator, available in a ceiling suspension model or in a floor-to-ceiling configuration, a measuring chamber for the Amplimat automatic exposure control, an optional LT tomography unit for linear sonography and tomography capabilities, and a computer-controlled Super or Medio CP high-frequency generator. First, we'll look at the features and functions of the Horizontal Diagnost H table. The Diagnost H is designed for easy and efficient operation. The tabletop can be raised and lowered or moved longitudinally and transversely in order to facilitate patient positioning. Table height is easily adjusted using the two center foot pedals. The left middle pedal lowers the table, and the right middle pedal raises the table. To release the longitudinal and transverse brakes, press either the right or left outside foot pedal. Pressing the longitudinal and transverse foot pedals also activates the centering light on the collimator. When the light is activated, it will stay on for 30 seconds to facilitate patient positioning. When the pedals are released, the brakes engage automatically, and the tabletop will not move until a pedal is pressed again. The longitudinal brake can also be released by pressing the button on the tabletop to the right of the Bucky unit. Patients can easily be transferred to and from the tabletop by adjusting the height. Do not allow patients to use moving parts as handholds. This can result in injury to hands and fingers. Direct patients to use the hand grips attached to the accessory rails for safety. Notice that in all cases, the patient is positioned with their head to the left and their feet to the right of the operator. This orientation is necessary when using the auto exposure control due to the position of the measuring fields in the Amplimat chamber assembly. Remember, never release the brakes or move the tabletop during patient transfer. With the Horizontal Diagnost H, insertion of a cassette is designed for easy one-handed operation. First, grasp the hand grip located in the center of the patient table. Pull the cassette tray out as far as possible. The tray will drop downward slightly and lock into place. Insert the cassette by pressing it gently against the rear clamp, which will slide apart to accept the cassette. Make sure the centering marks on the cassette and the clamp line up. With the cassette firmly inserted between the clamps, place it flat on the tray while gradually releasing the pressure against the rear clamp. The rear clamp and the centering aids on either side will lock the cassette into place. Raise the tray to horizontal and gently slide it into the Bucky until it stops. Follow the same procedure in reverse to remove the cassette. When the cassette is secured in the tray, the Bucky unit senses the size of the cassette, and the X-ray beam is automatically collimated to the size of the cassette. If a different exposure size is required, the collimator may be adjusted manually for a smaller exposure only. All exposures are prohibited outside the positive beam limitation range. If the automatic PBL system fails, an override will allow manual operation until the unit is repaired. To activate the system failure override, turn the key on the side of the collimator. Consult the table on the front of the unit to ascertain the optimum format and adjust the collimator using the knob on the side of the tube assembly. And although the system can be operated manually, an authorized service representative should be notified of any fault immediately. To move the tube assembly, grasp the hand grips. The brakes which control longitudinal and transverse tube movements are located next to the left hand grip. Next to the right hand grip are the buttons for tube rotation and vertical stand release. Also on the tube assembly are the light pointer button, the tilt angle indicator, a measuring tape for SID setting, a table of settings for SID and film format, the collimator light beam button, the knob for manual collimator adjustment, and a key switch for automatic collimation. There is also a tube assembly swivel release. Exposures with the horizontal Diagnost H may be done in two ways: with the bucky and tube assembly centered in the locked position, or with the bucky and tube at a position other than locked. To center the bucky and the tube, first grasp the hand grip on the bucky and push the lock release button. Move it to the right or left into its detent position. Center the tube assembly by using the buttons on the housing next to the left-hand grip. The tube stand will lock automatically when it is centered to the bucky. For exposures where the bucky and the tube are in positions other than locked, use the light pointer to center the tube assembly to the tray. Activate the light pointer by pressing the button to the left of the tilt angle indicator on the tube assembly. Move the tube over the bucky until the light pointer is positioned at the center mark on the cassette tray hand grip. For standard vertical exposures, first insert a cassette and position the bucky. Set the tube to an SID of 100 centimeters or 40 inches. The tube assembly will lock at this setting. Position the patient to the bucky using the collimator light beam to check the alignment of the tube assembly, patient, and bucky. Set and trigger the exposure at the control panel of the generator and remove the cassette from the bucky. To generate angled exposures, follow the same initial steps for adjusting the tabletop height and cassette insertion. Then press the longitudinal brake release button and move the tube assembly longitudinally away from the click setting. Use the button next to the right hand grip to release the tube assembly in order to rotate it to the desired angle as indicated on the tilt angle indicator. Then position the patient to the cassette by releasing the tabletop longitudinal and transverse brakes and sliding the table to the proper position. To properly position the tube assembly, activate the light pointer and pull out the measuring tape. Move the tube so that it measures 40 inches from the center of the bucky with the light pointer at the center of the hand grip. When doing angled exposures, it is important to remember that the positive beam limitation is only in effect when the beam is plus or minus 10 degrees of vertical. When the beam is angled beyond plus or minus 10 degrees, manual collimation is in effect. Use the table of settings on the front of the collimator to ascertain the optimum format and adjust the collimator using the knob to the left. Trigger the exposure at the control panel of the generator and remove the cassette from the bucky. When making tabletop or free exposures without the bucky, the tube does not have to be centered. When making free exposures, PBL is not in effect, and the collimator must be adjusted manually. As always, when PBL is not in effect, it is the technologist's responsibility to ensure that proper collimation is used in order to minimize radiation to the patient. Use the collimator light to adjust patient position in relation to the film. With the measuring tape, adjust the SID to 40 inches. Then trigger the exposure at the control panel of the generator. Lateral or side exposures are also easily generated with the horizontal Diagnost H system. For lateral exposures, the tube support assembly is swiveled around the stand or around the carrier arm in the case of a ceiling suspension unit. Release the tube rotation brake and rotate the tube around the carrier arm. Center the patient to the cassette using the light beam button and adjust the SID with the tape measure. The collimator must be adjusted manually when doing lateral exposures. As always, trigger the exposure at the generator. The horizontal Diagnost H can also be used for linear tomographic exposures when the X-ray tube support is coupled to the bucky unit with a coupling rod. To couple the unit, the bucky is centered to the middle of the table in the click position. Then, center the tube support assembly to the bucky until it locks into place and set the SID to 40 inches. Carefully insert the coupling rod into the receptacle on the ceiling suspension unit or the TS-20 tube stand. Lock the coupling rod in place. Transfer the patient to the table and position the patient by moving the tabletop. Insert a cassette into the bucky. Pull the tomography control panel out from under the right end of the tabletop. When the tube assembly is centered, the unit is coupled, and the SID is set at 40 inches, a green ready light on the tomography control panel will light up, indicating that all tomography conditions are met. Select the layer height on the tomography control panel by raising and lowering the centering point. The maximum range allowed by the system is 20 millimeters to 250 millimeters above the tabletop. The layer height in centimeters is indicated on the scale on the tomography stand. Select an angle and sweep time combination by selecting one of the 4 buttons on the tomography control panel. Remember, tomography is a 3-factor technique. Because of this, the time set at the generator must be less than or equal to the selected sweep time. This ensures that the generator will terminate the exposure. When the unit is ready, a test run can be performed without X-rays. Press the test button on the upper right side of the tomography control panel. Hold the button down until the end of the test run. If you interrupt the test run at any time by releasing the test button, the stand brake engages automatically, and the tube will have to be manually reset to the center position. After each uninterrupted test run and after each exposure, the X-ray tube assembly is returned to the vertical start position by a return drive mechanism. Tomography exposures are triggered at the control panel of the generator. When the exposure is complete, remove the cassette from the bucky unit. If another exposure is desired, insert another cassette, change the layer height setting, and trigger the exposure at the generator. Continue this sequence until the study is completed. When the tomographic examination is complete, the X-ray tube assembly and the bucky unit must be uncoupled. Because all exposures are triggered at the generator control panel, a basic discussion of the Phillips family of CP generators is necessary. Phillips Medio 30, 50, and 65 and the Super 80 CP generators all include the same easy operation with programmable buttons for standard studies, as well as the ability for free setting of all techniques. The 2-function Amplimat buttons are used to select the measuring fields and to simultaneously switch Amplimat on or off. There are 3 film screen combination buttons which allow selection of film screen combination to ensure proper film density. The manual technique and focal spot selection buttons are located below the Amplimat and film screen selectors. These generators allow the technologist to set studies with 1, 2, or 3-factor techniques, as well as large or small focal spots. The display includes icons for error message, incorrect exposure, ready for exposure, X-rays on, tube overload protection, and software version. KV, MA, MAS, and exposure time are displayed above the plus-minus buttons, which allow manual adjustment of techniques. The patient thickness buttons automatically adjust standard techniques for thinner or heavier than average patients. This is a 25% increase or decrease in density for standard programming. 24 anatomically programmed radiography and tomography buttons automatically program the generator for the examination requested. These APR techniques are preset using the service programming field buttons beneath the sliding door above the exposure button. They should be programmed by a qualified representative. These generators have the ability to control several different auxiliary devices from the same unit. In this application, we are using the Medio 65 CPH generator in conjunction with the horizontal Diagnost H. Prior to utilizing the system, power up the generator by pressing the ON button on the control panel. The system automatically performs an internal diagnostic test of all major components. All lamps, control buttons, and displays light up during this test. This allows the technologist to determine if any lamps or displays are malfunctioning. If an internal error is discovered, the service call symbol will appear in the upper left display. Simultaneously, ERR appears in the middle of the lower display along with an error code. Note this error code without touching any control buttons. The error code is used by the service department to ascertain the malfunction, and any action by the technologist will cause the display to reset. Notify service immediately of any problem. After the internal diagnostic check, the generator will signal ready with a steady green light. The patient can then be positioned and the study selected. Manual selection of the technique parameters is simple with the Phillips family of generators. First, select the horizontal Diagnost H with the appropriate auxiliary button. Then, select the appropriate measuring fields, film screens, focal spot, and operational parameters. Two-factor KV and MAS operation or three-factor KV, MA, and time operation can be selected with a single button and then adjusted using the plus or minus buttons below the LCD display. The generator compensates internally so that KV and MA values cannot be adjusted beyond safe operating parameters. If necessary, patient thickness compensation can also be added. The PTC thick and thin buttons automatically adjust the technique for the density of the patient. These generators can also be preset by anatomic regions according to radiographic parameters that have been predefined by the hospital. The parameters that can be preset include 1, 2, or 3-factor radiographic techniques, measuring fields, screens, focal spot, settings for KV, MAS, time, and MA, APR dose steps, correction values, and special techniques. These settings are generally pre-programmed when the machine is originally set up. However, they can easily be changed by a qualified representative. In addition, the APRT settings can be adjusted using several control buttons in order to modify pre-programmed techniques. Measuring fields, screens, technique, patient thickness, focal spot, and plus or minus KV, MAS, time, and MA can all be adjusted manually when using the APRT selections. For a standard radiographic procedure, pick the appropriate APR for the study you want, or program the technique manually, and trigger the exposure at the generator. An exposure signal on the LCD indicates when the generator is operating. The horizontal Diagnost H and a generator from the Phillips CP family combine flexible operational features, excellent optional equipment, and redundant safety features, such as constant self-diagnostic check, tube overload protection, and automatic tube load control, to make it a totally flexible, user-friendly system. Remember, this videotape was intended as a supplement to your operator's manuals. Use it only as a reference to reinforce the procedures for proper operation. Please read the operator's manuals and follow all the safety precautions carefully.